Anna.
Morgan.
Inori.
Morgan.
So we're here, we represent the youth. We have a youth publication. And, we want to know why you, a young person, are running for mayor of Toronto. What pushed you over the edge to make that decision?
I think it comes back to that word youth, that I wasn't seeing a voice of young people being represented in the politics in Toronto. I saw a lot of planning for, 10, 20, 30 years from now, and not a lot of involvement of the youth who would be not only involved in using those projects and involved in the building of them, but also would be eventually involved in paying for them. And we just weren't being invited into that conversation. And I mean invited into many other conversations as well in politics. So I decided I'd stick up my hand and make some change.
So now that you have stuck up your hand, how do you think, how have people been treating you now that you've announced that you're planning to do this?
Surprisingly, the mainstream media has been incredibly supportive. They've been really positive, and I think in many ways for them, I'm a novelty, so taking me seriously, or at least pretending to take me seriously, is good for them, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I've gotten some bullshit on, Twitter and online and stuff like that, but almost none of it, interestingly, has been about my politics. A lot of it's just been, you're too young, or you're too inexperienced, or just, generally mean.
Mm-hmm. But, I mean, in terms of youth, it's like there are very, few young people out there that are, very politically active, especially to a degree as running for mayor. So, is this a bigger movement that you're trying to take on?
I think I'm not trying to start a bigger movement, but I'm trying to be part of a bigger movement. I think there's been a movement of young people being active in many ways outside of the mainstream political movement. Often we don't vote, we're not involved in party politics, but we're really involved in environmental activism or in youth engagement in other ways. And I think I want to bring those youth and those conversations, and also youth who aren't involved in those conversations, also into mainstream politics. Because unfortunately, that's currently where a lot of stuff happens. And if we can be involved in that conversation as opposed to just lobbying the people having those conversations, I think it would change the conversation completely.
And do you think your current lack of experience in terms of big mainstream politics, do you think that's going to affect your campaign and how people receive you?
I think it will. I think it already has. For me, I think those things are an asset. I don't come from that world, so I'm a new, very different voice that would be coming into City Hall. I'm from a completely different perspective. I'm still kind of untainted by that machine. But I mean, it definitely has already affected people. No, I don't have experience winning elections. It's not a thing I've done before. But I mean, I'm sure gonna try. But my campaign will probably be way more grassroots and way more personal because I've got to be a working candidate. I mean, I can't have people working my Twitter feed for me because I don't have those people. My campaign is working on donations and me and a small team, and that's just the way it's got to be.
So what steps have you taken so far in, going forward with your campaign and, trying to get on the same level as those other candidates?
I think it's about being really clear that I want to do this, that I'm not, there are a few people running for mayor who are clearly doing it as a joke. And I think for me, it's about being really clear that I'm not doing with that and being really clear about the reasons why I'm doing it. I want to be mayor of Toronto, but I want to be mayor of Toronto because I think youth need a voice in City Hall. And this was a platform to, even if I didn't get the job, make that voice heard. No matter what happened, I was going to make sure that voice was heard and talked about in this election.
So, how do you feel about the how youth are treated in politics? I mean, we're marginalized essentially. We're not considered very important, even though, as you said before, in the next few decades, our voices are going to become crucial. So, how do you feel, and what do you plan to do exactly?
I feel pretty upset and angry, which is part of why I'm doing this. I think that when we get angry enough, we get involved and we do something about it. But what I plan to do is to get youth involved, to ask questions and to be there and listen with open ears and not say, oh, you think this. Because, I'm one youth. I know what I think, and I know what my friends think, and I know what some wider groups of youth think, but I don't know what is inside every person under 30's head. It's about asking people and listening to people and making sure they feel heard. I think youth aren't involved in those conversations because we don't feel appreciated and heard.
is that the biggest barrier, or are there others? Is it?
I think there are other barriers, but I think in some ways that's the biggest one, because then when we don't feel appreciated and heard, we don't vote. And then people say, oh, well, they don't vote, so they don't matter. And then, so like, well, if they don't vote and they don't matter, then why would we talk about their issues in politics? I mean, that makes no sense. If you're trying to get elected, why would you talk about people who don't vote?
So, do you think that all of these youth who are, their voices essentially aren't being heard, do you think they're going to be interested in your campaign? Do you think is that the demographic you're reaching out for?
It's definitely the demographic I'm reaching out for, and already it's kind of been working. I mean, for me, I've definitely got to reach out to a wider audience as well, but for me, it's the 11-year-old girls who send me emails with the word role model in them. Like, that's crazy. And, the 24-year-old kid who's never voted and said, well, you've made me excited to vote. Or the kids who are turning 18 in September and were like, I'm actually excited to vote for the first time. Like, that's crazy. No one ever feels like that. And and it's the conversations that kids, like, I get emails from parents being like, last night my kid mentioned your name at the dinner table, and we had a conversation for 2 hours about politics. We've never talked about politics before. And for me, like, whether or not that family votes for me, they had that conversation. And that's amazing and impressive. And if that's the only thing that happens, that's worth it to me.
So, apart from, the youth issue in Toronto, Toronto has lots more. So, what do you think are, the most blatant issues that we're facing? What's your vision for Toronto?
I've kind of been using the words digital, global, and green. And I think, for me, those are both problems and solutions that Toronto has. I think that we have a lot of opportunities as a pretty young city and a pretty cheap city, and, not in Canada, but in context of cities our size across the world. We have an opportunity to become a leader in technology and in environmental issues, and to become on that global stage and to add our voice to that as Canadians. And I think for me, that's what I see in 10 years. I think it would be amazing to get us to that place. And I think part of it is about, dealing with our transportation issue. We've just got to deal with it. Enough is enough. We've got to handle that stuff. But also, there are so many environmental issues in the world, and we as mayors, often there's a lot of power there to deal with the small stuff, with plastic bags and plastic water bottles and waterfront issues and that stuff. And I'm really interested by exercising that power to deal with the small stuff, which is often the easiest place to start.
Do you feel that the other candidates, don't have the same vision, or they just...
Yeah, actually, I think that the other candidates in many ways are here to tell voters what they want to hear. And that's nice. And that's a nice thing for voters to hear. But the problem with telling people what they want to hear is that, year in, when you can't follow through because it's not actually how things work, you got to tell the voters the truth. And I think it's better to get elected by telling the truth and being honest. We have to pay for stuff. And sometimes that means taxes. Like, that sucks. Sorry. But that's how it works. That you have to be truthful and honest.
You mentioned transparency as a part of your platform and your plans for the Toronto political system, and that and unification as well. So tell me about how that plays into your platform.
I think in terms of transparency, we have so many opportunities, especially with the internet. We can put everything online. Like, why are our city documents and city goings on so hard to get access to? Like, why do people have to summarize them in news articles? Why can't somebody just go and look? I know I get the city's emails on all their budget committees and everything, and the minutes are hard to read, everything is difficult and confusing, and like, you have to work hard to understand. And I think that there are a lot of people in the city who would be benefited by just having that information readily available in a format that's easy to understand for everyone, not just politics nerds. But I also think that in terms of unification, there are so many opportunities in terms of connecting all the boardwalks and connecting transit systems and all those little bits and pieces where we can unify a city and remember that we're one city. We used to be a bunch of cities, but now we're one, and we've got to figure out how to be that one city together and understand that there are different issues and there are different needs, and we got to take care of them all in our one city.
Do you think there's, a kind of sort of split between the suburban Toronto and the more urban downtown Toronto? That was certainly really highlighted under Rob Ford's...
Yeah, I think there is. And I understand, in some ways the suburbs get subpar transit service and those things. But at the same time, lower density means it costs more, and we have to reconcile and compromise. There's a huge divide between urban and suburban, and it's really unfortunate because it's not going away. Like, we're not gonna split up into an urban city and a suburban city. We've just gotta deal with it and heal that divide, because I think that every conversation we have in City Hall keeps coming back to that, and it sucks. And it shouldn't be doing that, because it puts a roadblock in the way of getting things done in City Hall.
Well, I want to ask you a really big question, Morgan. You're clearly very passionate about Toronto. You clearly want to, lead the city. So why do you think that now is the best time for you to do that? Why not, let's say, in 5 years or however many years? Why now?
It's interesting. A lot of people have said, especially when I was thinking about doing this, well, what about when you're 30? Do you think you'd do a better job at 30? And I think for me, it's like, right now, I'm at my most optimistic. I'm at my most idealistic. I have piles of energy. I'm not tied down by a husband or a wife or kids. I don't own property. Like, I don't have things to deal with, so I could just focus. And I think for me, if I got the job, I would have the time and energy just to focus on it, and I'd have the drive and the optimism just to get it done. And I think that in some ways, optimism and that willingness to just keep going and not be sidelined by other things in your personal life is something that's lacking in City Hall right now.